Charlie Chaplin stood on the deck of the RMS Queen Elizabeth in 1952. The massive ship was cutting across the Atlantic Ocean. He had left the United States thinking he was just taking a short trip with his family to attend the London premiere of his new film, Limelight. Behind him was the country where he had built his legendary career and become the most famous film star on Earth. But while he was still at sea, shocking news arrived. The United States Attorney General had completely revoked his re-entry permit. The government decided that the world's greatest comedian was no longer welcome. Officials declared that Chaplin could only return if he showed he was not a political danger or a moral threat under laws including the Mann Act and the Immigration and Nationality Act. He was locked out of America without a trial or formal charge. You might think this sudden exile happened because of a major crime. The truth is much stranger. Behind this humiliating decision was a powerful man who had spent 30 years obsessed with one bizarre question. Where was Charlie Chaplin really born? J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, had been watching Chaplin for decades. Hoover believed the actor was dangerous. He did not suspect Chaplin of violence or espionage, but rather of sympathizing with communist ideas. During the Cold War and the terrifying years of the Red Scare, the American government feared that foreign influence could poison the country through culture. Hollywood carried enormous power to shape how people thought. Chaplin's wildly popular films openly criticized social inequality. Movies like Modern Times showed workers struggling in industrial factories under harsh economic pressure, while The Great Dictator openly mocked Adolf Hitler and authoritarian rule. To Hoover, that influence looked deeply suspicious. He even called the actor a parlor Bolshevik, suggesting he secretly supported Soviet ideology. The FBI opened a massive file that eventually grew to nearly 1,900 pages. Agents combed through his speeches, studied his donations, and gathered gossip about his personal life. They noted that despite living in the United States for decades, Chaplin had never become a U.S. citizen. Because he remained a foreign national, strict immigration laws could still apply to him. Hoover just needed leverage to force him out of the country. He found his ultimate weapon in the actor's background. Chaplin always told the exact same story about his origins. He insisted he was born on April 16, 1889, at a specific address, 3 East Street in Walworth, South London. He repeated this consistently in interviews and wrote it in his autobiography. But when government investigators checked British registries for a birth certificate, they found absolutely nothing. Not one official document showed his birth. To the FBI, this missing paperwork felt like deception. During the early 20th century, wild rumors had spread through magazines claiming Chaplin was hiding his true identity. One persistent story suggested his real name was Israel Thornstein. Other gossip claimed he was born in France, had Eastern European or Jewish roots, or even held ties to radical political movements. Hoover pushed the investigation forward, hoping to show Chaplin had lied to immigration authorities. If officials could uncover a hidden foreign identity, deportation would appear completely justified. During the early 1950s, the United States government actually asked British intelligence for help. MI5 agents aggressively searched the records in Lambeth and surrounding areas. They looked for any trace of a French birth certificate and checked documents connected to the name Israel Thornstein. They checked under the name Chaplin and possible aliases. The intelligence agencies found zero evidence of espionage, zero evidence of a secret name, and zero evidence of birth registration. The most famous face in silent film had entered the world without leaving a single trace of official paperwork. The real reason Chaplin lacked a birth certificate had nothing to do with international espionage or hidden political agendas. The explanation was simply severe poverty. Long before the cane, the bowler hat, and the famous oversized shoes, Charlie was just a boy growing up in the harsh corners of London. His parents, Charles Chaplin Sr. and Hannah Chaplin, worked in the music halls. These lively, noisy theaters offered working-class crowds an escape through singing and comedy. But behind the curtain, the performers lived incredibly unstable lives. They traveled constantly from stage to stage following the work. Money disappeared as quickly as it arrived, slipping away between shows. In Victorian England, birth registration had become compulsory in 1875, yet working-class families living on the absolute edge of survival often failed to complete official forms. They moved frequently between cheap lodging houses or rented rooms and worried entirely about securing their next meal. Filling out government paperwork easily fell to the bottom of the priority list or was skipped entirely. The chaos of Chaplin's early years guaranteed that formal records were forgotten. The lack of a certificate created a permanent gap in his identity. And the only person who could have cleared up the mystery was the one person who could no longer speak clearly. His mother, Hannah, performed under the stage name Lily Harley. She had a strong voice, and in the smoke-filled music halls filled with drinking and constant chatter, a singer's voice meant everything. But her life collapsed quickly. She suffered from violent headaches and failing health that made her career difficult. During a performance in 1894, her voice failed completely. In the brutal theater world, audiences expected loud, lively entertainment, and a broken voice meant the instant end of a livelihood. The loss of her income forced the family straight into crushing poverty. Hannah tried sewing as a seamstress to survive, but it paid terribly. Worse than the financial ruin was what happened to her mind. Medical records later revealed she had contracted syphilis, likely from Charles Sr. or another partner in the theater scene. Untreated syphilis progresses slowly, eventually attacking the brain in its tertiary stage. It causes severe neurological damage, delusions, and terrifying psychotic episodes. In 1895, she was admitted to Lambeth Infirmary, suffering from extreme headaches. By 1898, at just 35 years old, doctors sent her to Cane Hill Asylum, a large mental hospital outside London. Medical reports described her horrific condition as syphilitic insanity or manic-depressive insanity. She suffered from mania, confusion, and highly fragmented memory. She moved in and out of crowded Victorian mental institutions that offered crude, cruel methods like cold baths meant to calm agitation. By 1903, she returned to permanent institutional care, where she would spend the next 30 years of her life. Charlie and his older brother Sidney had to face the rough streets of London practically alone. Their father struggled heavily with alcohol and died in 1901, leaving the boys without any parental stability at all. The brothers spent dreadful periods in grim workhouses, which were institutions where poor families received food and shelter in exchange for grueling labor. Life inside them could be exceptionally harsh, and children raised in those places often carried deep memories of hardship. Charlie experienced that painful world directly. Hunger and profound instability defined their days. Yet the stage offered a narrow path away from the misery. Charlie began performing as a young boy, sometimes even stepping in to replace his mother when she could no longer sing. He discovered he could make crowded rooms burst into laughter with a simple, perfectly timed gesture or a physical joke. Laughter brought small payments and opened doors to touring theater groups. He learned timing, movement, and the rhythm of physical comedy while traveling relentlessly across Britain. He turned basic survival into highly creative art. Eventually, those grueling tours carried him across the Atlantic to America. Motion pictures were a brand new form of entertainment, and studios desperately searched for actors who could hold an audience's attention entirely without speaking. Chaplin's highly expressive face and graceful movements made him a global sensation almost overnight. He transformed his hard-earned stage skills into the most famous character in cinema history. The character was the Tramp. He wore baggy trousers, a tight coat, oversized shoes, and a small bowler hat. He carried a cane and walked with a strange, shuffling step that everyone instantly recognized. But the character was not just a silly clown. The Tramp was a small man walking through a harsh, unforgiving world with immense humor and stubborn dignity. He faced hunger, aggressive authority figures, and social rejection, but he always picked himself up and kept walking forward. Audiences everywhere understood his struggle perfectly. People laughed even if they did not share the same spoken language because the emotion crossed all barriers. The pain and resilience shining on the screen were completely real. Chaplin did not rely on his imagination to create the Tramp. He built the character directly from his own brutal childhood. He knew exactly what crushing poverty felt like. He had watched a talented mother slowly slip away into an institution, losing everything to illness. The loneliness and unfair social systems the Tramp constantly fought against were direct echoes of the workhouses and the London slums. The comedian who made the whole world laugh pulled his beautiful humor from a place that deeply understood hardship. Wealth and massive global success changed his daily circumstances, but he never abandoned the fragile woman who first taught him how to perform. In 1921, Chaplin used his vast Hollywood fortune to bring Hannah from England to California. He desperately hoped a comfortable new environment might help her recover her lost mind, but the decades of untreated disease had caused severe, permanent damage. Friends and observers quickly noted that she seemed completely lost, drifting far away from reality. She could not speak clearly about the past anymore. Because of this quiet tragedy, the only witness who could have silenced the FBI's aggressive questions about his birthplace was totally unable to testify. When reporters and government agents probed into his origins, Hannah's thoughts were far too fragmented to offer any steady, reliable answers. The terrible disease stole her memory long before anyone realized how politically important that memory would eventually become. She died in 1928, leaving the core mystery of his birth permanently unresolved. Without official paperwork or a mother to verify his story, Chaplin remained highly vulnerable to political attacks. J. Edgar Hoover relentlessly used the uncertainty as leverage. The McCarthy-era Red Scare demanded complete ideological loyalty, and Chaplin's history of donating to social causes that officials labeled communist fronts made him a prime target. The government even used a messy 1943 paternity dispute involving a woman named Joan Barry to destroy his reputation. The scandal filled newspapers, and the FBI happily leaked private information to reporters to paint Chaplin as morally unfit. Attorney General Tom Clark openly warned in 1947 that Chaplin might face deportation as an undesirable alien based on morality laws. When Chaplin confidently boarded that ship in 1952, the political trap finally sprang shut. The United States cynically used immigration laws tied loosely to the Mann Act, originally written to combat human trafficking, to legally lock him out. Hoover never found a single document showing Chaplin was a spy or a fraud. MI5 agents found absolutely nothing. The absurd 1,900-page file produced nothing but wild rumors. Yet suspicion alone was powerful enough to force the legendary filmmaker into permanent exile. Chaplin proudly refused to beg for permission to come back to the country. He chose to settle quietly in Vevey, Switzerland, a beautiful town overlooking Lake Geneva. He spent 20 years living away from the American studios where he had crafted his greatest masterpieces. While living peacefully in Switzerland, Chaplin secretly held onto a bizarre piece of paper. Inside a locked desk drawer filled with letters, scripts, and private papers sat a note from a man named Jack Hill. Hill called Chaplin a little liar. He firmly claimed the actor was not born in a house in London at all. According to the startling letter, Chaplin was actually born in a caravan belonging to a Romani woman known as the Gypsy Queen, Hill's auntie, Sentina. The birth supposedly took place at Black Patch Park near Smethwick, an industrial area outside Birmingham. Romani communities lived nomadic lives, traveling constantly across Britain for trade and entertainment. Caravan births in the 1880s frequently went unregistered because traveling families sometimes avoided official systems that required interaction with local authorities. If the story was true, it perfectly explained this missing birth certificate. It also closely aligned with family whispers that Hannah's father, Charles Hill, had Romani roots. The letter further claimed Hannah moved to London with a circus troupe shortly after the baby arrived. Circus groups and music hall performers often shared the exact same traveling world. Chaplin could have easily tossed the accusatory letter into the fire. Instead, the most famous man on earth carefully preserved it inside his private desk. He never spoke about it publicly or tried to verify it. His daughter Victoria only discovered it in 1991, long after his death. We will never know if Chaplin kept it because it echoed distant, fragmented memories from his fading mother, or simply because it beautifully fit the chaotic rhythm of his early life. He began in intense hardship, survived through constant movement, and turned performance into his ultimate refuge. The obsessive investigation into Charlie Chaplin's birthplace lasted over 3 decades and stretched across 2 continents. Government officials hunted for a hidden danger, terrified that a comedian with left-leaning ideas might secretly be a dangerous foreign agent spreading propaganda. They desperately wanted evidence that he had completely fabricated his identity. They found a far simpler truth. Charlie Chaplin was exactly who he always said he was. He was a British performer born into a struggling music hall family. The complete absence of his birth record did not expose a massive political conspiracy or a secret spy ring. It merely exposed a harsh world where poor families focused on surviving the day, not filling out government ledgers. He endured an agonizing childhood, lost his beloved mother to a devastating illness, and faced extreme political paranoia that drove him out of his adopted country. Like his famous tramp, he wandered through a brutally difficult world and kept moving forward anyway. 2 decades after being legally locked out of America, the bitter exile finally broke. In 1972, the Academy Awards officially invited Chaplin back to the United States to receive a special honor for his massive achievements in cinema. The man who was once aggressively investigated as a moral and political threat walked onto the stage as a living legend of film history. The audience rose to their feet and gave him a massive standing ovation. The incredible moment carried a quiet sense of closure. The vicious rumors had finally faded. The gigantic FBI file gathered dust, and the world remembered him for the brilliant, timeless laughter he pulled from a life of incredible pain.